On March 3rd, 1847, in the town of Edinburgh, Scotland, a child was born. This child would grow up to be one of the greatest men in history. This child grew up to leave his handprint in time, a legacy that lives on until today. In his youth, Bell remained in Scotland, educated by his grandfather Alexander Bell, before moving on to a period of schooling at the University of London. He worked mostly with elocution and speech, teaching for a period of time at a school in England. Later, in 1870, the family left their roots behind to move to Canada, while Bell then moved on to the US to pursue his career. He began by founding a school for the deaf in Boston in 1872. 1 year after this beginning, he became a professor of speech and vocal physiology. In the midst of his teaching career, Bell began working on a new invention to lead us into a new age of communication. He first settled on the idea of creating a multi-telegraph. This would allow multiple telegraph messages to be transmitted over wire at different pitches. He continued to work on this project with support from his father-in-law, Gardiner Green Hubbard. Hubbard was eager to finance this work, feeling that this would end the monopoly of the Western Union Telegraph Company. He and Thomas Sanders were the primary financial backing for Bell's experiment. Bell soon moved on to the idea of transmitting sound itself over wire. This was a novel concept, as much a fantasy as Columbus and the idea that the world was round in the 1400s. Bell even admitted that had he understood electricity, he would not have invented the telephone, having been discouraged by the well-known fact that it was impossible to send voices over wire. Without this foolishness, leadership, whatever you choose to call it, there's no telling where we would be today. Alexander continued to pursue the idea that had fascinated him for so long.
Alexander Graham Bell.
March of 1875, he met with Joseph Henry, the director of the Smithsonian Institution, in order to discuss his ideas. After years of effort, his first grasp at victory came on June 2nd, 1875. This was the first transmission of sound over wire. This was the first step, the first tremendous step, into a new era. For with this single taste of victory, we came past the point of no return. Bell had led the world into a new age of communication. It was almost a year later when the first real victory came. Not long ago, Bell had applied for a patent. He raced against many other inventors to claim the patent, and with it, the ability to change the world. So on March 7th, when that patent was granted, Bell faced a thrilling success. Now he, and he alone, could lay claim to the founding of the new era of communication and technology. 3 days later, on March 10th, Bell's assistant, Thomas Watson, became the first person to ever receive a telephone call. Bell called, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want you." This victory was the true birth of the telephone. And with the success of this invention, an enormous world of opportunities opened up. Plans for a company began, and in 1877, the Bell Telephone Company was formed. The company has undergone several changes and transformations since then, but Alexander Graham Bell's legacy lives on in the company now known as AT&T. The company opened up their first line in 1885 from New York to Philadelphia. That same year, the American Telephone and Telegraph Company was formed as a subsidiary of the Bell Telephone Company. This later became the AT&T that we know today. The company flourished, spreading advanced communications across the U.S. and eventually further when the first transatlantic telephone service between London and the US via radio was built in 1927. However, earlier in 1894, trouble arose when Bell's second telephone patent expired. This brought competition back. Despite the difficulties brought on by the patent's expiration, the company continued its work. Within 10 years of the patent's end, over 6,000 other companies had arisen throughout the US, breaking Bell's monopoly. Later, in 1984, the company suffered a breakup. It had become a necessary step in order to prevent a total monopoly on the telephone. Soon the company was able to reunite into the one company that still exists today. Alexander continued his work with sound and with the Bell Telephone Company for the rest of his life until his death in August of 1922. His legacy lived on in the Bell Telephone Company, which continued to flourish, remaining one of the most significant telephone services in America. Alexander Graham Bell created the telephone, leading us into a new age of communication, a new age that others were certain could never exist. This legacy lived on in AT&T, but Bell also left another kind of legacy.
I would say cell phones basically everywhere. It's very rare that I go outside of the house and you don't see at least one person like texting or doing stuff on their phone.
I think cell phones have become pretty much a necessity in day-to-day life here.
Today, 1 in 2 American households have landline phones, while 90% of American adults have cell phones. Phones have become inseparable from us, a part of humanity. This is the legacy of Alexander Graham Bell.